Oh, The Mandalorian. This show is a mess, and I say that in the kindest way possible. There are elements of the show that are great. You can see bright sparks of entertainment that do exist within it, but it's utterly dumbed down by backwards writing decisions that somehow make every episode prior feel redundant in its themes and its narrative devices, because there's absolutely no natural flow in the way that this story is presented. There are many glaringly annoying creative decisions in ways certain parts of the show are presented when the stories are translated into the visual medium, and episode 5 is just the clearest example to me yet about why this season has just been so disjointed and confused in how it's trying to tell the story from my perspective. But with that said, there were definitely parts of this episode that I did thoroughly enjoy. It was entertaining as much as it was stupid, and so for that reason I consider this to be a fun mess. But this episode could have been so much more, just as much as this season could have been so much more, and that's really the story for the season as a whole. There are going to be spoilers ahead, so you have been warned. So, episode 5 of The Mandalorian starts on Navarro, and it sees Greef Karga discussing his plans and whatnot for the city. He then hears a load of screaming outside, so he rushes out and has a look, and he sees a big cruiser in the sky. He then gets a call from Gorian Shard, the pirate from episode 1, who says, "Surrender or we're gonna destroy you," and funnily enough, he doesn't actually give them the opportunity to surrender, and he just starts destroying them anyway, and Greef then begins evacuating the city. Now, I want to be very clear because I said the same thing in episode 1. I absolutely adore the designs of the aliens, especially Gorian Shard. I think it looks great, I think it looks cheesy and fun, and it reminded me of a Vogon from Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, which I absolutely loved. However, Gorian, alongside every other alien, has this terrible lip syncing with their speech. Now look, I know that this is a nitpick because Star Wars isn't perfect in any way, and the detail and the work that would have to go into these creature designs to make them perfect would have to be so precise. But that's what makes Star Wars specials, it's the little details. And so when these characters are chatting away and their mouths are just randomly flapping in motions that don't match their words, I find it really kind of jarring. Anyway, we then go to a completely separate planet with a bunch of X-Wings and Y-Wings. It's some kind of New Republic base, and that X-Wing pilot that keeps popping up every now and then in every season, whose name I forget always, just like the junkyard lady on Tatooine, gets a distress call from Greef Karga saying that he needs help. And then Zeb Orrelios from Star Wars Rebels just shows up for no reason. He's just kind of chilling in this New Republic base with this X-Wing pilot. I was always really curious to see how the CGI was going to look for Zeb as a character, because I had no doubt that he would have popped up in Ahsoka. And I have to say, he looks really, really good in live action. And you know, as cameos go, I actually really appreciated this one a lot more than some of the others, because it wasn't overblown in any way, it wasn't forced, the episode wasn't screaming at you saying, "Look, don't you remember this character? You remember him, right? You're gonna love this." He was just kind of there, he just kind of existed, and they didn't make a huge deal of his presence, and I felt that worked better as a cameo for the story. Now, it's been made very clear over the course of the season, the New Republic have no jurisdiction over Navarro because it's an independent planet. So the X-Wing pilot dude goes to Coruscant, and he tries to request resources to help the planet. He then goes into the head office of some dude who basically tells him to do one, again really reinforcing that the New Republic are very fallible, and it reinforces that theme from episode 3. Also, Elia Kane from episode 3 is there, speaking about how she was liberated from the Empire, and how this will be a lesson to the people of Navarro that the New Republic should be relied on for its protection. She is very manipulative, very scheming, and I like her character. I like the way she is portrayed. I really enjoyed some of the elements of the writing here. It had that foreshadowing, it had that kind of villainous over-presence. Then we have this segment where all of the people on Navarro have been evacuated and they're out in the wastes, And again, another glaring issue that just doesn't translate very well into the visual medium. And I would actually put this down to the volume being used when it shouldn't. I say it every week, meaning they can't be expansive in the way they shoot things, they can't have scale, because Greef Karga evacuates the whole city. The city has been bombed and overtaken by pirates, and all of the people take shelter underneath this big rock, and Greef is giving a speech about how the New Republic are going to come to save them. But when you look at it, the evacuation shows like 50 people. You could have easily had this shot where there's hundreds of people evacuating the city. There's hundreds of people crowded around not knowing what they're going to do because their home has been invaded. And to me, it just kind of made the severity of this invasion feel really small and not quite as impactful as the episode's trying to portray, and as it should have been. Anyway, Mr. X-Wing pilot conveniently manages to find the hidden Mandalorians on the monster planet that doesn't have a name yet, I don't believe. And this is because the droid that the Mandalorian picked up in the second episode conveniently has connections to this one rebel pilot. Anyway, he basically says, you should go and help Greef Karga, I can't do anything, but you deserve to know he's in trouble, and so you go and save him. Din Djarin then basically raises this with the rest of the Mandalorians, saying that he was given the option to kind of live on Navarro with this big area of land. And so maybe if they help Greef, they can make this planet their home again, instead of hiding away in this rock with all these monsters. Then Paz Vizsla gets up, and you think he's going to give this speech about how Din isn't worth following. But surprisingly, his tone switches. He's like, no, this man saved my son's life. I trust his judgment. And I thought this was a nice bit of character development for Paz, who up to this point has been nothing but this big brute. But this small moment showed a bit of intimacy to him. It showed a bit of willingness to change. And I like that. Then the Mandalorians all agree, and this episode kind of turns into a big action fest. An action fest that is very entertaining. As I said in my preface to the review, there are elements of this episode that are great. It's very fun to watch. The gauntlet comes out of hyperspace over Navarro, which I thought was a great shot, and then the N1 flies into the planet and it attacks Gorian Shard's cruiser, and it basically drags the cruiser's attention as well as all the fighters. Meanwhile, Bo-Katan slips in unnoticed in the gauntlet, and she drops all of the Mandalorians into the city, who then start fighting the pirates on the ground. Now, surprisingly, I actually really preferred the segments with the starfighters and the cruiser. I thought the CGI looked great. I thought some of the dogfighting was really entertaining. And it was just really, really great to watch. However, that's not to say that the fighting on the ground wasn't fun. But I did think that it was quite basic in some of the cinematography and some of the choreography for the fighting. I just think they could have been a little bit more creative and a little bit more unique in the way they presented these Mandalorian squads dropping in and the way they operated in their approach to their attack, but they didn't really do that. They just kind of dropped in and started blasting away, and it was fun, it was entertaining, but it was just a bit simple. Anyway, the Mandalorians end up getting pinned down because there's a turret up in the high ground, and lo and behold, the armorer manages to sneak into this building, and of course, the armorer doesn't carry any blasters or anything. She goes in with a hammer and tongs, and she starts beating the hell out of these dudes, allowing the rest of the Mandalorians to clean up on the ground. Now, I could criticize this and say how stupid it is. She walks into this room full of pirates with a hammer. But Star Wars is cheesy, Star Wars is sometimes silly, and it was funny to watch, so it is whatever. Now, as the action is moving between the aerial battle and the ground battle, there are little shots here and there, cutaway shots where you're seeing Gorian Shard and his aliens on his ship kind of giving out commands and shouting out directions and stuff like that. And as I mentioned earlier, the mouth syncing here is so jarring when he talks and when his alien crew are talking as well. And it just seems to get worse as the episode goes on. But either way, Din manages to destroy all of the starfighters that were chasing him, and this infuriates Gorian Shard, who turns the cruiser to try and shoot down the N1, but this thing is way too fast, and I really did appreciate the way they were using the camera to show just how fast the N1 was. And even though Gorian is getting really frustrated and he's trying to destroy it, this doesn't work because the N1 and the Gauntlet, Din Djarin and Bo team up and they blow the hell out of it. Angorian and his ship crash into the ground, and he goes out in a blaze of not so much glory. But anyway, all of the people of Navarro then corner the rest of the pirates who are trying to escape as grief returns to the city, and they then proudly proclaim that the Mandalorians have saved them, they are indebted to them, and should they wish to, they can stop hiding and they can treat Navarro as their new home and have a whole section of land for themselves. And then a storytelling decision occurs that absolutely bewilders me. And it doesn't just bewilder me, it actually infuriates me. The Armourer calls down Bo-Katan, and she's inside the forge from Season 1 that was destroyed, and she talks about the Mandalorians and Mandalore. She then says to Bo-Katan, "Take your helmet off." Now, of course, Bo is a little taken aback, but she does as her told, because she is a lackey to the Armourer, obviously. And then the Armourer basically says, "You are the one that walks between the way and all of the other Mandalorians, so you're the one that's going to unite us all." I was gobsmacked, like I literally couldn't believe what I was watching. Bo then walks out with the Armourer without her helmet on, and all of the other Mandalorians are like, "Oh my god, she's got no helmet," to which the Armourer's just like, "Yeah, no, it's all cool, she's our leader, she's going to unite the Mandalorian clans so we can take back Mandalore." And all of these Mandalorians are like, yeah, that seems fine, no problem. I was literally in shock. Like, I couldn't believe how pointless this one creative decision made so much of the narrative of the show. Certain elements of Season 1, the end of Season 2, the Book of Boba Fett's interlude episode, the overarching character plot of the Mandalorian himself in the first few episodes of this show, it's like we've just kind of forgot that Din Djarin was the wielder of the Darksaber, which is the symbol of Mandalorian leadership. Literally, the entire character arc for Din Djarin has been about his redemption for taking his helmet off. Now, the Armourer doesn't give a shit. Despite having no character development, despite it making no sense within the flow of the story, the Armourer's just like, "Yeah, cool, it's fine, man, you take your helmet off, it doesn't matter. We all need to reunite anyway, and Bo-Katan, you take your helmet off, you go show your face to the rest of the Mandalorians, it's chill, you're the girl who walks in between the lines of Mandalorian, I don't know, Mandalorian culture anyway, it's chill." So what has been the point of all of these plot threads about the Watch and the fact they are a cult? There isn't one. It has made so many of these story elements of past seasons, past episodes, past character arcs feel completely worthless. I literally could not believe what I was watching. The whole point was that the children of the Watch were the bad guys. The establishment of the Watch was to make it this cult who strayed from the Mandalorians, and they fractured the Mandalorian people. And that Din was brought up in this cult. He was indoctrinated and didn't actually recognize the ways of the true Mandalorian people. But now it's all good because the Armourer's had a change of heart. And there really was no development, there was really no storytelling flow for the Armourer to have a change of heart here. They try and use the fact that Bo-Katan told her that she saw a mythosaur as an excuse, but it does not work. It just does not work. All it took was for Bo-Katan to say, "Hey, I saw this giant dragon on our homeworld, so now you're going to completely forget about your values and your ideals as the leader of the Children of the Watch." If they built that relationship between the two to where in which the Armourer slowly came across to believing Bo-Katan, then maybe it could have worked a few episodes down the line. But it does not work when it's literally one episode between them meeting and there is absolutely no character development and there is absolutely no bond that's truly been made between these two characters. It's like they completely forget that Din Djarin had the Darksaber, you know, the thing that by Mandalorian creed means that he is the leader of the Mandalorians, the Mandalore. But yeah, it's fine, Bo-Katan tells a story, a character she has absolutely no relationship with, and she's like, "You know what, yeah, screw the Watch, Mandalorians need to come together." It's totally and utterly backwards. It completely trivializes so many of the themes and so many of the narrative devices and so many of the plot threads that got us to this point in the first place, and I hate it. I think it's such awful storytelling, and it's just that much more aggravating given that it's such a core element of the overarching story of The Mandalorian. Anyway, whatever, the episode ends when a TIE fighter's floating through space and it comes across a derelict Lambda shuttle, and supposedly this was the one that Moff Gideon was on, at least that's the impression I got, and there were remnants of Beskar armor on this ship, so it kind of implies that Moff Gideon was rescued by Mandalorians or something. But yeah, that's how the episode ends. It ends on a cliffhanger. So yeah, like I said, this show is a fun mess. It's entertaining to watch, but it has no real substance. If you were to take the name Star Wars out of The Mandalorian and present this show as its own thing from a storytelling perspective, I guarantee no one would be interested in it, and it would not be getting positive reviews. And even then, judging by the viewing figures, even the name Star Wars isn't quite having the effect that it used to. And, you know, given the show is called The Mandalorian, he is barely relevant in it. In this episode, for example, he is the one at the beginning that rallies the Mandalorians to come together and to save Greef Karga. And yet by the end of it, there's no credit to him, there's no reaction to his actions in the battle, there's no kind of reference to how the Mandalorians are kind of circling around him as a leader character. This is all kind of going to Bo-Katan. Now, I'm not one of these people that's like, oh, it's the Bo-Katan show, because I think Bo-Katan is a very important character in the wider Star Wars universe when it comes to the Mandalorians. But you can easily intertwine Bo-Katan's story with Din Djarin's, without Din actually feeling like a side character in his own show. And you know, I said the same thing last week. It's like they saw the roaring success of the Book of Boba Fett and how they made Boba Fett a side character in his own show. And they were like, you know what? Yeah, this is exactly what The Mandalorian needs. I don't know what's going on over there in the creative department at Lucasfilm, but for me, yeah, the creative decisions, some of them are just bewildering. Also, quick tangent, but there's another thing that I want to mention, and that is the music of the show. The music is really, really poor. I've noticed week by week that the score just hasn't had the same impact that it did in Season 1 and 2. It feels like the score is really basic. It doesn't feel like Star Wars. The only time when you're really like, hell yeah, the music's really kicking in is when the Mandalorian himself is on screen and it has the Mandalorian theme playing. And then it finally clicked. Ludwig Göransson isn't the one that wrote the score for this show, and it really shows. But anyway, I could go into a numerous amount of reasons why this show is not working for me, but I think with every review, it's just kind of building up. There's a lack of focus, there's a lack of natural storytelling flow in the overarching plot, in a lot of the character development, which is making it feel stiff, and as I said at the beginning of the video, very disjointed. And funnily enough, somebody said to me that this feels like the Star Wars version of the Power Rangers, and the more I watch it, the more I am seeing that, and I just found that comparison kind of funny. And sadly, I'm not overly excited for the rest of the season. I watch it because, you know, I'm positively hopeful that something happens that just makes it all worth it. I'm really hoping that by the end of it, it all clicks and I think to myself, okay, it actually makes sense, a lot of these decisions that were made. But we will just have to wait and see. But there's not a lot of episodes to go, and I will be kind of surprised if they do manage to save it, for me personally. Anyway, if you enjoyed the review, don't forget to hit the like button, it helps me out a great deal. And if you want to see my review of next week's episode of The Mandalorian, perhaps consider subscribing so you are notified when it goes live. I'll see you guys in the next video. But until then, may the Force be with you. Always.